on behalf of the Rutan branch with Ari Gallen. Ari Gallen is the founder of the Rutan branch. He couldn't make it here this evening, but he sends his fondest regards. So we'd like to introduce a very special guest, Aaron Braunstein, who will be speaking about his involvement with the State Department in North Africa. A very, very, very interesting topic that I'm sure all our listeners here tonight and our viewers out there will be intrigued to hear. So Aaron has an amazing CV. In fact, I could spend basically the entire evening speaking about Aaron's CV, but I'm just going to very concisely mention for all those who were not able to be here this evening, and then we'll introduce our guest speaker. So Aaron was born in 1938. He's nearly 80 years young, a very energetic young 80-year-old. He was born in Brooklyn in the States, and he went to Brooklyn College, and then he made Aliyah, his Aliyah Aleph, when he went to study in Israel. He got an appointment. Well, he was chosen to be on the Jewish Agency. It was a leadership course, and he studied at the Machon. And then he did his BA in History and Political Science at Hebrew University, and he finished in 1963. Then he went on, very interestingly, Aaron learned French, and he went to Paris. And he went to the Institute of Political Studies in Paris, and from 1963 to 1965, he got his master's degree. He then went back to the States, and he joined the State Department, the Foreign Aid Department, which is part of the State Department. His first appointment, and this is very interesting, because Aaron studied French, and in those days it wasn't so common for an American to study French. America was getting involved in South Vietnam. South Vietnam was once a French colony, and I think it stood Aaron in good stead that he studied French. So he was appointed, his very first appointment, to South Vietnam, and he was there in 1967. And Aaron told me just before I talked that he had the very first Seder in South Vietnam. Unbelievable. And the very famous Richard Tucker, he was the one that did the Seder service, and Aaron will tell us a bit more about this very, very interesting and fascinating event that he experienced. He then went on to Peru. He studied Spanish, so Aaron's very, very, very talented at languages, to have picked up French, Hebrew, Spanish fluently. He spent half a year in Peru, and then his first full assignment was from 70 to 71 in Tunisia. And Tunisia today is very topical in the news. The Arab Spring, what's happening unfortunately in Tunisia, that Arab Spring has become more like a disaster, and we see the terrible things that unfortunately are happening in that part of the world. The promise and the hope that the spring that people wanted unfortunately hasn't materialized. But Aaron was there, and we are so excited to hear what he's going to say about his experiences in Tunisia. He then went on to French Muslim West Africa, and he spent years in Senegal. And then in 90 to 95, with his family and with his son, he went to Egypt, and he spent time in Egypt. Also a very interesting place to be in. And in 96, Aaron made his Aliyah Bet, his second Aliyah, together with his wife and his 10-year-old son. And then a few years later, still very active, still very contributing to society, Aaron 7 years ago founded the Jewish Covenant Alliance, and this is the Jewish mission to the nations. So Aaron has a very remarkable CV, and we really look forward to your presentation this evening. And without further ado, I call on our guest speaker, Aaron Braunstein. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Les.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure being here with all of you, and I hope we're going to have a very interesting time together. I'll do some, open up some chapter headings in what was really a fabulous time in 30 years with the American Foreign Service. And Let me just mention that Les mentioned Vietnam. It's now 50 years since the 1968 Tet Offensive of the Viet Cong and the Viet Minh, primarily in the city of Hue in South Vietnam, that shook up the entire world. 50 years this week since the Tet Offensive. And I was in Vietnam for 3 months, half a year before that offensive. And you heard about the Passover Seder we had, mostly for the American troops, the American Jewish troops that were fighting there at the time, and in various other positions. And it was an exhilarating experience to have for an entire evening, a fully Jewish environment with the famous opera singer Richard Tucker as the cantor and the reader of the Megillah, of the Haggadah, I should say. When I went back to Washington after those 3 months, I ran into a colleague, Gilda Varati, also a Foreign Service professional, who I had known in the year previously at the State Department. She was the desk officer for Tunisia and Algeria at the time. We're talking 1967, thereabouts. And she knew that I spoke French, and she saw me in the hallways at the State Department. She said, "Aaron, how would you like to go to Tunisia? We have an opening there." I said, "Sounds fabulous." And I'll talk more about that as we get into the entire story. So that's how I happened to go to Tunisia in December 1969. I was there for approximately 2 years, and at the time, Tunisia is a very fascinating country because it's a very pluralistic country, because it had so many foreign influences laid on top of the basic Berber population of the country. And in fact, most people don't realize it, that the name Africa was the name the Romans gave to Tunisia, to their possession in Tunisia after they had defeated the Carthaginians. So you had the original Carthage, which is just outside the capital of Tunis. And then you had the Roman influence. And after the Roman influence, you had the Arab conquest. And then you had the French colonial period, all influencing the mentality and the history of the Tunisian people today. And in fact, as Les mentioned, the Arab Spring began in Tunis, in Tunisia, with an incident, a bureaucratic outrage against a Tunisian merchant who set himself on fire, and a wave of reaction to the dictatorship of Ben Ali at the time swept the country. The regime was thrown out, and while the Muslims came into power, the Muslim Brotherhood, they didn't last very long, because people enjoyed their freedoms in Tunisia. And today you have a secular government in Tunisia, and it's maybe the only, so far, success story in the entire Arab Spring that has turned into Islamic winter. I use that term advisedly because a good friend of mine, Professor Rafi Israeli, wrote a book just a few years ago called From Arab Spring to Muslim Winter. Excuse me. Now, I was involved in my assignment there in the U.S. Embassy with the Foreign Aid Program in developing the program of assistance, selecting sectors for economic development, projects, allocating the money for each project, etc., presenting the program for approval by the U.S. Congress, etc. And I worked very closely with Tunisian assistants, one fellow Muhammad Ali and the other one Muhammad Abbasi, working together. And also part of the program was a program, the beginnings of programs of family planning in the Muslim world. Some people are amazed that family planning really took off in Muslim countries in general and in Arab countries in particular. But they realized, the government realized that they were in a no-win situation with, at that time, the population growth rate, with all the schools that would have to be built, and the jobs identified, and the education provided for a burgeoning population totally beyond any means that the governments or any resources that the governments could muster. And the exciting thing about it is that the family planning program in Muslim countries is presented with the Quran in hand. The leaders, those who promote the program, mobilize clerics, and in Egypt, as we'll see, it's both Muslim and Copt, Christian Copts, to support the program, and using verses from the Quran in the Muslim case, which would be the health of the mother, the need for child spacing after a birth, the mother should rest, having children that you can raise properly, and not just running around and sprouting like grass in the field. And the Quran is used in Muslim countries for the purposes of promoting family planning. And we'll come back to that again when we talk about Egypt. The Jewish community of Tunisia at the time, it was about 5,000 Jews, many of them in the country for 2,000-3,000 years, as in the case of Jerba, the ancient community of Jews in Jerba, which predate the the Arab conquest, and the island of Jerba in the south. And now, unfortunately, the community has dwindled down to about 2,000. Interestingly enough, during the summer, the community would expand because the Jews in Tunisia were not able to easily repatriate their funds there. They were able to get some of their money out, but not all of it. So the sons and daughters who were studying mostly in France would come home for the summer and spend their vacation in Tunisia. Now will entertain later on questions about Tunisia, but I want to also move to the other main posting that I had in North Africa. Most people don't think of Egypt as part of North Africa. It's part of Northern Africa. But before going to Egypt, I was back in Washington, running health programs, nutrition programs. Forgot to mention, I hadn't mentioned to Les Glassman that the agency, the State Department, sent me to Johns Hopkins University to do a second master's in public health in 1978. So after that training at government expense, I went overseas. I worked first in Washington in multi-sectoral nutrition planning for development and in health services. And then I went overseas again as a health officer, family planning officer, mother and child health, etc. So in 1986, I went with, by that time I had married and I had a son who was just 1 year old. We went off to Senegal for 4 years, where I led the health program of assistance in Senegal. And from Senegal, I was identified for assignment because of my newly acquired academic training in health services. I was identified for assignment to Egypt. And I went to Egypt to run the assistance program in family planning in the private sector. I had a colleague who ran the program for the public sector, the hospitals, the official government health clinics. That was a whole other area tied to the Egyptian bureaucracy. I worked on three major programs three major projects in Egypt, in the family planning area, excuse me. It's not vodka. One of it was contraception distribution, marketing of contraceptives. We had, the Egyptian government had a whole program set up that we provided funds for. And then creation by the Egyptians. All of this was us helping the Egyptians. The same thing in Tunisia. Us helping the Tunisians. Programs approved together and designed together with the local officials. The second project that I managed of assistance was the development of model family planning clinics. We discovered that if you provide good services, the women vote with their feet and the men support them in this sense because the government is behind it. This was during the period of Mubarak. In Tunisia was the period of Habib Bourguiba, who was the founder of the modern state of Tunisia. And the third project was support for a major governmental media campaign. So I worked very closely with the Egyptian State Information Service, and they developed, with our assistance, video clips about the importance of family planning, docudramas, posters, everything, so that family planning would enter into the public consciousness as a national endeavor to put Egypt on the right track if it was ever really to develop. And we had some very good successes, mostly in the urban areas, bringing down the rate of births from 7 per family in many cases to 3 and 4, primarily in the urban areas. So it was quite a success. And I would tell my Egyptian colleagues that really lit them up that Egypt, at that time 90 million, with half the population, would be twice developed. So a factor of 4. Half the population, Egypt would be twice as developed as it was. And they understood that this was a national endeavor. It was their endeavor. We lived in a nice suburb of Cairo, Maadi suburb, Maadi, to the south of Cairo. And we had very good quarters. We had a choice between official American buildings and between apartments rented on the open market. And because the apartment in the official building gave us an extra suite for visits of my wife's mother and other visitors who came to see us in Cairo, we took the larger apartment in the official U.S. billets. Many experiences there. Of course, I was fluent in Hebrew. I knew quite a bit of Arabic at the time. I couldn't handle negotiations in Arabic at a professional level because the language of all the Egyptian professionals was English, in addition to Arabic, of course. And one of the service people at our complex, he said, we had a bicycle for our son. I said, where do I keep the bicycle? So he said to me, you have to put it in the marzan.
Wow.
In the marzan. Oh, marzan. And which in Hebrew is machsan, if you didn't catch on right away. And then he says, and I have the key, the muftach. And this is lazim muftach l'marzan. So I said, oh, muftach l'marzan. I says, maybe I can remember that. Muftach, mafteach in Hebrew. The cognates between Arabic and Hebrew are in the hundreds, once you really get into and understand how the Arabic language is constructed. About a week later, I came back to the service person and I said, can I have the muftach al-marzan? He almost flipped over twice, because no American had ever remembered to say something like that in Arabic. I want to show you something that I developed for our association, and I don't know if the camera gets this properly.
Get it,
And you think it's Arabic. Well, it's Arabic letters. And you have at the bottom the Twin Towers. But you have to read it from left to right. If you read it from left to right, it is, can anyone take a guess as to what this says? From left to right in English. Okay, I'll let you in on the secret. All's well? All's well? All's well in Arabic. And the answer is no. All is not well. We're still fighting the battle against radical Islamic terrorism. That's a new phrase in Washington. Radical Islamic terrorism. And now represented by Iran and Hamas and Hezbollah and Daesh. He says in the Muslim Brotherhood. So that's all's well in Arabic letters. So I was trained in Arabic, but at a very basic level. I can read it today. I can read the Quran with the help of the English translation next to it. I used to be able to carry on some conversational talk at the time. Unfortunately, much of that has disappeared. I was involved in a number of important milestones at the time. Approximately once every 6 months or every year, each of the Foreign Service officers was recruited for a week as the duty officer. It meant that you were on call 24 hours a day for an entire week. I mean, you could sleep, but you could get a call in the middle of the night for some emergency. And you had a duty officer book. This gives you a sense of life in the Foreign Service. And in it, you had instructions as what to do in each case. We had one American tourist who ran out of money and couldn't get back from Upper Egypt. By the way, you know, Egypt, you have Lower Egypt, which is on the top, and Upper Egypt is the bottom, because the country is built on the way the Nile flows. The Nile flows north, so that Lower Egypt is the delta, and Upper Egypt is the headwaters coming out of Ethiopia and the Sudan. In my work on the family planning program in Tunisia, I got to travel the entire country, visiting health clinics throughout the country, going along with the director of the program, one-on-one. Very exciting time. October 1991, none of you will remember what happened that year, was the International Madrid Conference. to bring together Israelis and Palestinians. I think Yitzhak Shamir, prime minister at the time, was tied up and brought to Madrid in order to be the official representative of Israel at the conference. And of course, an invitation for the conference came in by diplomatic telex for the invitation for the Foreign Ministry of Egypt. And guess who was the duty officer that week? Yours truly.
Wow.
So I had throughout half the night busy calling up the duty secretary, getting her down to the embassy, typing up the invitation on official format, and then delivering it to the foreign ministry in Cairo. So the Egyptian representation at the Madrid conference was in part participation. The Egyptian participation at the Madrid conference in Cairo was partly due to my efforts as the duty officer for that week. Every year, just like we had the Seder in Vietnam and in Tunisia, I participated in 5 Seders in Egypt. And they were organized by the Israeli embassy in Cairo. I was there during the period of 3 or 4 different Israeli ambassadors, and always invited to Jewish holiday celebrations at the Israeli embassy. And my job as the ranking Jewish resident on the non-Israeli side was to recruit American Jews who were serving in Cairo, whether with NGOs or with the embassy itself and all its agencies, and visiting Americans and others, visiting foreigners to Egypt who were Jewish. And we got maybe 100, 200 Jews together at a Seder meal at a major hotel each year. And some people said to me, well, isn't this really strange that Egyptians are waiting on Jews at the table for the Jewish Seder? And I said, not really strange at all, because the Exodus is in the Quran. In fact, I once led a Seder using the Haggadah and the Quran for the story of the Exodus from Egypt. It's all there. And that in fact, Nebi Musa, the prophet Moses, one of the many prophets adopted by Islam, is a watershed also in terms of the belief in one God, Beni Israel, the children of Israel, going to their land. All of this is in the Quran. And therefore, thanks to the Exodus, there was the fulfillment of the mission of the Jewish people, the Hebrews, beginning with the Hebrews, of course. And then because of that, eventually the rise of Christianity first, and then Islam. So if there would never have been an Exodus from Egypt, then there might never have been a Christianity or an Islam. So the Egyptians who were helping with the Seder really, once they thought about it, were very happy to be participating in a Jewish, quote-unquote, Jewish event that has impacted on the entire world. It's interesting. Egypt is an absolutely, I must say, of all the countries I served in, 6, 7 different countries, Egypt was the most fascinating because of its history. And I would always chuckle whenever you hear the quote from Prime Minister Menachem Begin during the Sadat visit. He said, "We built the pyramids." Well, I hate to tell you all that the Hebrews, the children of Israel, did not build the pyramids. The pyramids were standing in Egypt 1,000 years before Moses. And that gives you a sense of the breadth and depth of Egyptian history. And in fact, Egypt is known by all Muslims, all Arabs and all Muslims, as el Dunya, the mother of the world. El Dunya. Everybody knows the word Ima, el Dunya, the mother of the world. And to live there and to work there and to visit there for 5 years, relations one-on-one between myself and between my Egyptian colleagues were excellent. And I must say, your typical American WASP doesn't have the same feel for a Middle Easterner that a Jew has. And therefore, as a matter of rapport between myself as an American Jew and my Egyptian Muslim colleagues was excellent. I should say, Lower Egypt, you have the ancient capital of Memphis, and Upper Egypt, you have the ancient capital of Thebes. Today it's called Luxor, which is the plural of the Arabic word for castle. The castles. Luxor means the castle. Qasr is castle. Uksur, it's an internal plural. We have a few of those in English, child and children is an internal plural. Uksur, palaces. El Uksur, Luxor. So that was a little bit of introduction to Arabic language and civilization. And there's much more I could talk about in that regard, but on another occasion. One of the highlights of our visit, our residency in Egypt, was going on tours of the Egyptian Archaeological Society. And the most impressive was a visit to the Eastern Delta, to the cities of Pi Ramses and Avaris and Tanis, the sites, the archaeological sites, where the Jews were enslaved, where the children of Israel were enslaved for hundreds of years in Egypt. They did not build the pyramids, but they built the storehouses of these new cities. What happened is that the cities in Lower Egypt, that means on the Delta, were built on a tributary of the Nile River. And eventually those tributaries would dry up so that the boats, commerce could go throughout the entire ancient world through access to the tributaries of the Nile in the Delta. Now, over a period of 100 years, those tributaries would silt up. Tremendous flow from the Nile would bring sand and earth. And then that site would no longer be useful for navigation. And then the ancient Egyptians would move their capital. So the capital, and this was during the period of the Hyksos conquest of Egypt of several hundred years. And the capital would be moved from one site in the Eastern Delta to another. And the children of Israel, the Hebrews, the Jews, enslaved, were used to build the new capital. And since there are no stones there, the Egyptians would have the previous cities cannibalized, cut up into blocks, and moved to the new site, to a new tributary of the Nile. And that's what the Jews did in slavery. Built storehouses there. It's all in the Bible, in the Tanakh. And it was absolutely fabulous to see blocks of stone that our ancestors had to carry from one site to another, actually lying there in the ruins of these ancient capitals. Tremendous history. We're talking, of course, Moses 1200 BCE, before the Common Era. And the other thing that was very nice, living and working in Egypt, we got to take our vacation in Israel by bus every year. And we went once with our son by bus, and when we crossed over by ferry across the Suez Canal, we and crossed then the Sinai and came into Israel, and it was, and 1 year was all spring, and the flowers were covering all the hills and plains coming into Israel. And our son said, "We've entered the land of Oz," from the Wizard of Oz. If you remember the movie, when Dorothy is blown out of Kansas and lands in Oz, and she opens the door of her house, and there everything is in Technicolor. And that was the exact feeling that we had coming into Israel on one trip when we went in the spring, entering the land of Oz. The Jewish community in Egypt, unfortunately, nothing like nothing remained of it. I think there were like 80 Egyptian Jews, apart from Jerba. In Cairo, maybe 80 Egyptian Jews. The average age was 83. All the others had either left or been expelled, expropriated by Nasser, and many to Israel, others to Europe. There are Egyptian Jews here all over. I meet them constantly in one encounter or another. Also, the thrill of being able to visit the Ibn Ezra synagogue in Old Cairo, where the Geniza was discovered. The Geniza was the repository of anything that had been written in the community in Hebrew, in Aramaic, in Judeo-Arab, and was stored rather than to be thrown away. Or buried. But there was a Geniza, and therefore over 1,000 years, all of these scraps of pieces of documents, etc., were kept in a vault in the Ibn Ezra synagogue. And now thousands of these documents are at research centers all over the world.
They got from the Rambam, original correspondence of the Rambam.
Original correspondence of, thank you, Les, original correspondence of the Rabban, of the Rambam, were discovered in the Geniza, in that storage area. And to visit the synagogue where that was, where those documents, they're all taken out now, of course, so you didn't see any of them on site. They're at universities all over the world now for study. Also, the Jewish cemetery is maintained. The Jewish synagogues, like there is a synagogue in Mahdi, in the suburb Mahdi, where we lived, and it was used only for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, because for not wanting to travel, and it was opened up for that time, and there was always an Egyptian guard, official Egyptian guard, posted at all of the synagogues in Egypt, and at the cemetery also. The main Jewish cemetery in Cairo, the Bassatin Cemetery. So that gives you pretty much an overview of life in the Foreign Service, life in Tunisia and in Egypt, life living there as a Jew, and participating in the life of the country and the development of these countries. So I think we'll take some time now for questions.
Can I make one observation?
Yes, please.
In Cairo,
yes,
I think when I was there in the late 90s, there wasn't even a minyan left. And in Alexandria, we met the head of the community.
Yes.
I think a woman was the head of the community then.
What year was that?
It was in the late, like 98, something like
98.
that, 98.
I think.
And there wasn't even, in Cairo as well, the shul's still there. Beautiful shul with a lot of Sifrei Torahs. They opened it up for us.
Right.
But there's not even a minyan in Cairo, in Alexandria as well.
Well, the
barely a
minion
million.
comes not so much from Egyptian Jews remaining.
Yeah, but Egyptian Jews, there's less than 15 in each city of Alexandria. And
Today, that could well be, because the age was so advanced, many of them have just passed away. But we went to synagogue at on Adley Street in Cairo, in downtown Cairo, every year for different festivals. And there is a Jewish library maintained there of Jewish books, holy books. Yes, please.
Do you have any contacts from your Egyptian past with people you knew?
Yes,
during the service?
since coming back to Israel.
Is it possible?
Yes. That's a very, very good question, a very difficult question. Living in Israel, we've been a bit hesitant about maintaining our contacts with Egyptians. Non-Jews, and Jews there's almost none. We were helping an old lady, first name was Fortuna, a Jewish lady, and she passed away a few years after we left. But with my Egyptian colleagues, I tried to find an address of one of them, but I think probably it was probably safer not to maintain the contact from Israel. Safer for them not to maintain the contact from Israel. But I should, to follow up on the other side of your question, we have very close contact with many of the Israelis who served at the Israeli embassy in Cairo. Ambassador Sultan, who's retired in French Hill area, Ambassador Chaim Koren, who's also retired and living in the French Hill area of Jerusalem, with Ambassador Tzvi Meisel. Although he came to Egypt as ambassador years after I had served there, we knew each other from Paris. He was studying in Paris at the same institute where our studies. He was doing the doctorate and I was doing my master's. We had a chance to meet there and then renew acquaintance here. And also Ambassador Dubek, who is who, after being Israel's first ambassador to India, went as Israel's first ambassador to Cairo. And when we arrived, he was the ambassador there. And we were at the residence of the Israeli ambassador for the various feasts, for the various holidays. And there is also the Israeli embassy maintains an Israel Cultural Center in Cairo as part of the agreement, the peace agreement with Egypt, that there would be an Israeli Cultural Center frequented by Egyptian Muslim students who are studying Hebrew. There is a good number of Egyptians studying Hebrew for work in tourism, with Israeli tours that come, with different agencies of the Egyptian government where Hebrew is an advantage, with the broadcasting, Egypt broadcasts in Hebrew. So there were a number of Egyptian students studying Hebrew at the time, and they would frequent the Israeli Cultural Center, and we had speakers come over from Egypt, like Amos Oz, and former ambassador, the first ambassador after, I believe, the first ambassador after the peace treaty with Egypt, after the Sadat visit, was, I'm drawing a blank at him. He came also to visit and to give a lecture at the Israel, and I would go quite often to attend the lectures that had come in. Yes, there was a lot of exciting times.
Yes, I would like to know, did you feel a difference in the way of being between the Tunisian people and the Egyptian people? Can you draw a difference, the way
Yes.
they perceive life?
It's a very, very, very good question. The each people has their own national characteristics. I like to explain that in the Middle East, I'm talking about from Egypt to Iran, there are only three nation states. And I leave Iran out because half the population of Iran is not Persian. It's not ethnic Persian. Three bona fide nation states in the Middle East: Egypt, Turkey, and Israel. All the others are different variations of Arab states not having a consensus, a national identity. Look at Syria. Look what's gone on. The bloodbath in Syria. 10% of the population, the Alawites, ruling a majority Sunni population. Look at Iraq. 1/3, approximately, one part Kurd, one part Shia in the south mostly, and one part Sunni, warring against each other. Saddam Hussein as a Sunni dictator massacring the Kurds. You look at probably, and even in Saudi, and even in the Arabian Peninsula, it's all based on tribes. But in terms of national identity, it's Egypt, Turkey, even though, I don't know, 30-40% of the population is not Turk, it's Kurd, and of course Israel. Now Tunisia. So therefore, there is a national identity. They consider, you see, they consider themselves with different identities. Egyptian first, then Arab, or Muslim, or you can do it the other way around, Muslim, but yet 10% of the population of Egypt is Christian, the Copts. And they were the original Egyptians before the Muslim invasion. Many of those that are Muslim in Egypt are converted Egyptians from the centuries after the Arab conquest. So that's one national identity, is Egypt. And as I mentioned, Tunisia is another national identity. I didn't include it in the first group because they're not Middle Eastern. They're North African with their own separate heritage. And as I mentioned, Punic from the period of Carthage rule, Roman, Arab conquest, French colonialism, etc. And an underlaying not of ancient Egyptians, but of Berbers. All of North Africa was Berber until the Arab conquest and Arab settlement. But it was always the elite. A classic example is the Norman conquest of England. French, Norman, conquest of England, 1,000 years ago.
Norman, which was Viking, a descendant of Vikings.
Also related to the Vikings, not related to the Angles and the Saxons, you see. So you had in England, for centuries, a Norman, French, Viking superstructure over the basic inhabitants of the country. Now all of that is mixed together today. The same thing, all things being different, the same thing with regard to Egypt and with regard to Tunisia.
Can I
yes.
make an observation?
Yes.
You mentioned about a very nice question about with Egypt and having connections. So I was actually in Egypt 3 weeks ago on the way back to South Africa. The Air Sana flies from Tel Aviv to Cairo nearly daily, on a daily And
Daily
then you
flights.
take the Air Egypt from Cairo to Johannesburg, and there are a lot of people that are using that route because it's very convenient and
Probably cheaper.
financially it's actually it's very economical. But what was very interesting is that you can actually go into Cairo. You go to the airport and you show your Israeli passport, and I had no problems. I even went with my kippah because I didn't have my hat. It was in another case, and I had a very positive experience with everybody there in Cairo. And one day, and okay, but it was one day, but
Still.
there's very good relations. The flight from Sinai from Tel Aviv to Cairo it's very well, a lot of people use that flight, and they're very happy that there is the connection between the two countries. So it's nearly on a daily basis, the
Right.
Sinai, and I think the relations, it's a cold peace, but at least there is a peace. So in the philatelic world, I'm very close with the Egyptian commissioner and the judges, and they know I come from Israel, and we have a very good connection with each other. So on a one-to-one basis, I think it's very good.
That's good you mentioned it like that, on a one-to-one basis. The
On a personal, the personal,
Personal level.
With Israeli
with
passport,
Israeli
you
passport.
flight,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now you have to
Not
get a
South
visa.
Africa.
South Africa you can, but you need to get a visa. They've made it a bit more difficult for South Africa and for Israel. Before, you could just show your Israeli passport. In fact, I'll tell you something interesting. When I went in the late 90s, if you had a British passport, you had to pay for your visa. With Israeli passport, you didn't have to pay anything. So, but now they have made it, you have to get a visa, which is a bit more difficult. But there are a lot of Israelis that do go to Egypt, and tourists.
We went to Israel maybe 5 or 6 times during our stay, during our 5 years in Egypt for vacation, and each time we didn't fly, we went by bus because we were 3 people, and that was also an experience, crossing by ferry the Suez Canal. But I mentioned, talking about the Suez Canal, after the Gulf War, and one of the aircraft carriers came back from the Arabian Gulf. I emphasize not Persian Gulf, the Arabian Gulf, because the one side of the Gulf is populated by Arabs in Arabia. The other side in Iran is populated by Arabs. So, and the Iranian government becomes epileptic. The Ayatollah government becomes epileptic if you say Arabian Gulf. So I encourage everyone I speak to say the Arabian Gulf and not the Persian Gulf. That's all part of psychological warfare that we're promoting through the Jewish Covenant Alliance, which Les mentioned in his opening remarks. One of the aircraft carriers, the John F. Kennedy, I think it's been retired since, came back in 1991 through the Suez Canal, and they alerted the American Embassy in Cairo that anybody who wanted to join and be on board the aircraft carrier for the trip from the south of the Suez Canal to the north could do that. We went by bus from Cairo to the entrance to the Suez Canal. We got on board the JFK, and we traveled for several hours the entire length of the canal, saw the fighter planes on the deck that had notches for the number of hits they had, number of enemy planes they had shut down, or number of missions that they had got. It was an absolutely unbelievable experience. And if you're ever going from Jerusalem to the north along the Jordan Valley, there's one place there, one rest stop along the way at a gas station, where they have a refurbished railroad car set up there next to the restaurant, and inside is a whole display of U.S. Marine memorabilia, and including a picture of the JFK aircraft carrier, plus a letter from the admiral was given to the owner of this rest stop. And there's a whole display there. So if you're going by car from Jerusalem down to the valley and then north, you have to stop there. It's an unbelievable experience. It was especially unbelievable for us to see the JFK memorialized in Israel, thanks to the relationship between the restaurant there and the U.S. Marines. By the way, you may not know it, one of the great advantages of being overseas in the Foreign Service is one of the functions, one of the tasks of the American Marines is to be the guards at every embassy and every consulate in the world. And every year the Marines have what they call a Marine Ball to honor the anniversary, the birthday of the U.S. Marines. I think the U.S. Marines were founded even before or at the time of the Civil War, before independence, at the time of the War of Independence, before 1776, or thereabouts. And every year in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem, because they're two separate postings, one to the embassy and one a consulate general. I'm not sure what's going to happen to the consulate general now that the United States has recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. But in any case, until now, there's been a Marine Ball run by the Marine contingent at each of these official posts, and we try to attend at least one of them every year or every 2 years, because they were our protectors at all the embassies where we served. So we really have a feeling of gratitude to the U.S. Marines, who were our protectors over all those years. I was, if you add it all up, I was 15 years in Washington and 15 years overseas. Usually a Foreign Service officer serves more overseas than in Washington. It might be 20 and 10, but in my case, for very interesting reasons, I served 15 years overseas and 15 years in Washington. So we can take some more questions. Yes, please.
Maybe this is a funny question, but is there anything new, any development with Egyptians' claim for the fortune we took when we made Exodus?
Yeah, very good question. It's a very unusual and a very funny episode. Of course, as you know, when reading the Bible and reading the stories of the Exodus, the children of Israel, the Hebrews, left Egypt with a lot of treasure, which was either taken or donated by the Egyptians at that time. And there was an Egyptian lawyer who decided he wanted some publicity, who decided he was going to sue Egypt, he was going to sue Israel as the representative of the children of Israel. I mean, right there's it's very funny because most Muslims, almost all Muslims, refuse to recognize that the Jews of today are the Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, Bnei Israel, mentioned in the Quran. So here was a lawyer suing Israel as the representative of the Bnei Israel mentioned in the Quran. You see the absurdity from their perspective. But he thought it was a good gimmick. And of course the answer to it was little payment for the hundreds of years of slavery that the children of Israel had to suffer. And I should mention also one other thing. At every Seder that we have, I always mention the mix. I always mention that in a certain percentage, in a certain way, all Jews are also Egyptians, because it's written in the Bible that the children of Israel left Israel with a mixed multitude. Erev Rav, a mixed multitude. Now, who was this mixed multitude? This mixed multitude were not Jews. They were maybe the poorest classes, the Lupan proletariat of Egypt, that were almost in a position of near slavery in any case. And they saw this as an opportunity to get out. And I have a parable that I like to say at the Seder table, commemorating the Exodus, that why were there so many Egyptians that tagged along with the children of Israel and leaving Egypt and becoming part of Am Yisrael over the generations? Because when there had been 9 plagues in Egypt, there were many Egyptians who decided to say, this is for real. Maybe their God is more powerful than our God. And then you come to the 10th plague, and it's the death of the firstborn. And who escaped the 10th plague? Only those who put the blood of the sacrificial lamb on the doorpost. So then when the killing of the firstborn sweeps Egypt, those that have the blood on the doorpost are saved. So if you were a poor Egyptian and you had seen 9 plagues coming true, you ran to get blood from anywhere you could and put it also on your doorpost. Now, what happens after, when Pharaoh finally allows the children of Israel to leave, and they go around and they see, not the Egyptian officers, but their KGB, their secret service, the KGB of the Egyptian pharaonic rule, and they see that there are other houses with the blood on it. So these people are in danger now, not from the angel of death, but they're in danger from the Egyptian authorities. So they figured they'd better get out. So they joined on. Now, I've never read this anywhere. This is something that I thought of, and it adds, I think, a nice touch to remind people that the great-grandmother of King David was Ruth the Moabite. And it's time that we started to realize that we're a people with a mission and not a people with one race or one ethnic background or another. And you have the ingathering of the exiles. There's even a street, an exit on the Ayalon highway called in Israel called the ingathering of the exiles, Kibbutz Galuyot. So there are all of these experiences that come together.
Moses' wife, Zipporah, was
What?
black. Moses' wife, Zipporah, was
That's right.
She was black.
Black, exactly. And I'll mention one other thing and bring in
beautiful. Rashi says beautiful.
But
yes,
you have to, probably that the same question was raised at the time of Alexander the Great.
Yes.
Regarding the taking of the wealth of the Egyptians.
I didn't
and the
know.
same
Yes.
argument was used, and the same answer was used.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was the answer that Israel gave back. And I think eventually the Egyptian lawyer realized how he was putting his own foot in his mouth by making this kind of claim. But that's a subject for another discussion. I should mention, maybe in closing, tell you a little about the Jewish Covenant Alliance, which is Jewish mission to the nations, us to them. And it's only been possible, whether by Chabad or by our association, since the restoration of Jewish sovereignty. Because during 2,000 years of dispersion and exile, any Jew would say to his Christian or Muslim colleague or neighbor, say that we have a mission to you, would be just slapped down. And for obvious reasons, both in terms of our low status and also because of the whole issue of replacement theology, whether it's on the part of Christendom or on the part of Islam. Islam also has replacement theology. Why in Islam, Moses, God, Allah, gave the Quran to Muhammad because the Jews and the Christians had corrupted the message that, according to their understanding, had corrupted the message, the original message. So Israel, the people of Israel, had to deal with replacement theology for 2,000 years, and we couldn't speak up. But now we can speak up and warn the entire world about the threat of evil idolatry today. Sodom and Gomorrah today in Syria, and the massacres there, and the threat of Islamic, radical Islamic terrorism, you see. And when we speak up as a Jewish mission to the world, we're not just doing it for ourselves, we're doing it for all of mankind, including the Arabs, including the Muslims. More Muslims murdered by this fanaticism than any number of Christians or Jews. Thank you
Wonderful.
very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Aaron, on behalf of the Root and Branch and the Israel OU Center, we want to thank you for a very fascinating, illuminating, it was really a wonderful presentation that you gave. You have had an amazing, incredible work experience, what you've done for the State Department, your
Knowledge,
travels,
understanding.
yeah, your knowledge, your grasp of the situation. A very young 8-year-old. We just wish you many, many more
8-year-old, I
years.
like that. 8-year-old.
Just a little note, a small little note. We just wish you all the very best health, happiness, and may you continue in your wonderful work that you do. You're very passionate what you do, and it comes across very, very well. And we were just very fortunate to have you here tonight, and we thank you immensely for your wonderful presentation.
And also we have literature about JCA for all those who would like to take some. So please feel free.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very,
you
very
very
much.
much.
Thank you. And thanks our audience for being here and our listeners for listening to this talk. Thank you.
Thank you.